Chapter 15: Managing Employee Motivation and Performance. The learning objectives for this chapter will include to know the nature of motivation, including its importance and historical perspectives. Also, we want to understand the major content perspectives on motivation as well as the major process perspectives on motivation. Further on the learning objectives, we'll learn the reinforcement perspectives on motivation as well as understand motivational strategies and the role of organizational reward systems in motivation. The importance of employee motivation in the workplace. Now, motivation is the set of forces that cause people to behave in certain ways. We understand that motivation reflects behavioral choices, right? So, employees of an organization may choose to either work hard or do just enough to get by or even do nothing at all, right? So, we find out that the determinants of individual performance within organizations, the first on the list will be motivation, right? How willing are they to do the job? Motivation will be about the desire to do the job, right? And the second determinant of performance would be the ability or capabilities or competencies to do the job, right? That would be the capability to do the job. Now, the third determinant of individual performance will also be the work environment, right? How conducive is the workplace for the employee, or are they equipped with the necessary resources that they require or that they need to get the job done, right? So you find out that as much as ability and work environment can be controlled by the manager, because for ability or capabilities or competencies, an employee can be sent on training, right, or development opportunities may be provided for the employee to gain skills, right, or to gain abilities or capabilities that they need to get the job done. The environment, the resources may be provided by the manager or by the organization, right, or the environment may be made better conducive or better aligned to the employee's needs, right? So that the employee can actually perform better. But we find out that most often than not, managers cannot control motivation. The diagram on this slide illustrates the motivation framework, and we can see that for an employee to be motivated, first and foremost, the manager identifies the need or deficiency which that employee has that has to be addressed, right? And we can see that for all these processes that are catered for by the motivation framework, they are provided for by both the content, the process, and the reinforcement perspectives on motivation, right? They address different parts of this process on motivation. We find out that the content perspective actually provides or caters for the search for ways to satisfy need, right? Because the content perspective basically looks for is all about how the manager looks for ways to satisfy the need of an employee for them to be motivated, right? Now, the process perspective basically looks at what are the behaviors that will satisfy the need and the evaluation of need satisfaction. So you find out that the process perspectives actually caters for the third and the fourth stage processes or stages in this process of the motivation framework, right? And you now have the reinforcement perspective. So this perspectives rather on motivation, they differ from the historical perspectives on motivation. Historical perspectives on motivation. The traditional approach. This approach proposed by Frederick Taylor is based on the assumption that work is inherently unpleasant for most people, and that the money they earn is more important to employees than the nature of the job that they are performing, right? So it's basically saying that people or employees of an organization were motivated by money. Now you have the human relations approach also under the historical perspectives, right? And this approach assumes that employees want to feel useful and important, right? That employees have strong social needs and that these needs are more important than money in motivating them. Then you have the third approach, which is the human resource approach, right? Which is of the belief that participation would enhance motivations and assumes that contributions themselves are valuable to both individuals and the organization, right? So when employees actually make input, as much as the employees feel valuable by virtue of their contributions, the organization also benefits from such contributions. Content perspectives on motivation. The content perspectives is an approach to motivation that tries to answer the question what factors motivate people. It focuses on the needs and need deficiencies of employees of an organization, right? And you find out that this perspective, or rather the content perspectives, deal with the first part of the motivation process, right? And some of the theories or laws or postulations that actually fall under the content perspective of motivation will include the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the Herzberg's two-factor theory, and the Macklan's achievement, power, and affiliation needs. The needs hierarchy approach. Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests that people must satisfy five groups of needs, right, in a particular order. So it basically suggests that employees or individuals within an organization will remain at one level until that need is satisfied and they move up to the next level, and that people will not regress to earlier levels. Now, looking at the physiological needs, right, is basically about attending to basic survival and biological functions. These are things that relate to food, sex, and air, which represent basic issues of survival and biological function, right? In organizations, physiological needs are generally satisfied by adequate wages and the work environment itself. Now, looking at security needs, right? This is about seeking a safe physical and emotional environment, right? These are all about the need to be free from worry about money and job security. These needs can be satisfied in the workplace by reasonable job continuity, an effective grievance system, and an adequate insurance and retirement benefit package. Now, looking at the need of belongingness, right? This is about experiencing love and affection, right? This includes the need for love and companionship and the need to be accepted by one's peers. A manager can help satisfy these needs by allowing social interaction and by making employees feel like part of a team or work group. Now, looking at the esteem needs, this is about having a positive self image or self respect and recognition and respect from others, right? Now, this is the need for recognition and respect from others, like we said, and a manager can help address these needs on an extrinsic level by basically providing symbols of accomplishment such as job titles and nice offices, and on an intrinsic level by providing challenging job assignments and opportunities for the employee to feel a sense of accomplishment, if that makes sense. Now, looking at the self-actualization need, is about realizing one's potential for personal growth and development. It involves a man like a manager can actually help an individual meet his or her self-actualization needs by providing opportunities for this employee to participate in decision making and learn new things. Further on the needs hierarchy approach. Now, the contributions of the Maslow's theory, one would be that it identified and categorized individual needs, right? Also, it emphasized the importance of needs to motivation. The downsides of Maslow's theory will include that all levels of need are not always present, right? Not every employee or individual actually has all those needs, right? Now, ordering or importance of needs is not always the same for all individuals across organizations or individuals of an organization, right? Now, cultural differences also can impact the ordering and salience of needs. The existence relatedness growth theory, or the ERG theory. This theory was developed in response to criticisms of the hierarchy of needs, right? It basically says that people's needs are grouped into three possibly overlapping categories, and they include existence needs, right? And this existence needs corresponds to the physiological and security needs of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now you have the relatedness needs, right? This basically focuses on how people relate to their social environment. And you have the growth needs, which is associated with the realization of an individual's full potential and the need to self-actualize, right? So it corresponds to the esteem and self-actualization needs of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now you have what you call the frustration regression element, which says that if needs remain unsatisfied, the person will become frustrated and regress to a lower level and begin to pursue those things again. Whereas Maslow's hierarchy of needs basically says that when a need is satisfied, that there's no point in time where that individual regresses to an earlier level, right? But the ERG theory is of the opinion that when needs remain unsatisfied, that the person out of frustration actually regresses to a lower level. The two-factor theory. Frederick Herzberg's two-factor theory of motivation suggests that people's satisfaction and dissatisfaction are influenced by two independent set of factors, and these factors include the hygiene factors and the motivation factors. Now, the hygiene factors are related to the work environment, whereas the motivation factors are related specifically to the work content. So, it behoves on managers in an organization to ensure that deficient hygiene factors are not blocking motivation, and for them to actually increase motivational factors for employees, right? Because it is related specifically to the work content. They can actually use job enlargement or job enrichment and redesign of jobs, right? So they can use job enlargement, which is increasing the job purview of the employees, right, to motivate them, especially for high performing employees who would want more challenging tasks. Or they can use job enrichment, which actually precludes the enlargement and granting of autonomy to employees, right? So it's both an increase in the job purview of the employee as well as granting them some form of autonomy on how they approach the job, right? Now you find out that Herzberg argued that by providing hygiene factors at an appropriate level, managers do not stimulate motivation but merely ensure that employees are not dissatisfied. Now, for managers to actually motivate employees, they must provide the motivation factors, right, which is actually related to the work content. Now, the criticisms of the two-factor theory include that interview findings are subject to different explanations, right? When people who have actually put this to use, when they were interviewed based off this, they they produced different results, right? Now, sample population was not representative when this theory was actually postulated. The sample population was not representative. Also, subsequent research has not upheld the theory. The columns on this slide are basically illustrating the two-factor theory of motivation, expressing both the motivation factors and the hygiene factors, right? Telling us what factors actually cause for lack of dissatisfaction among employees when there is provision of hygiene factors, right? So the hygiene factors actually do not cause for satisfaction. Actually, they provide for lack of dissatisfaction, whereas motivation factors could actually provide for the actual satisfaction, right? So looking at those columns, we can see the list of things that actually contribute to both the hygiene factors and the motivation factors. Individual human needs. Now, the Magellan's human needs theory play a role in motivation as well, and we find out that the need for achievement, need for affiliation, and need for power have been the focus of research. Now, need for achievement is the desire to accomplish a goal or task more effectively than in the past. The need for affiliation is the desire for human companionship and acceptance, and the need for power is the desire to be influential in a group and to control one's environment. Process perspectives on motivation. The process perspectives are approaches to motivation that focus on why people choose certain behavioral options to satisfy their needs and how they evaluate their satisfaction after they have attained those goals. Now, some of the very useful process perspectives on motivation include the expectancy theory, the Portalola extension of the expectancy theory, the equity theory, and the goal setting theory. Expectancy theory. This theory suggests that motivation depends on two things: how much we want something and how likely we think we are to get it, right? So the theory rests on four basic assumptions, and the first is it assumes that behavior is determined by a combination of forces in the individual and in the environment. Also, it assumes that people make decisions about their own behavior in organizations. Further, it assumes that different people have different types of needs, desires, and goals. And finally, it assumes that people make choices from among alternative plans of behavior based on their perceptions of the extent to which a given behavior will lead to desired outcomes. Right? So you find out that the expectancy model suggests that motivation leads to effort, and that effort combined with employee ability and environmental factors results in performance. Performance in turn leads to various outcomes, each of which has an associated value that is called valence. So this diagram on this slide is basically an illustration of the expectancy theory. So it basically stipulates that for an employee to be motivated, right, they want first and foremost on the job, they should possess the relevant capabilities or abilities to get the job done. Now they should put in the effort, right? Having the right abilities doesn't just provide for good performance. The effort should be put in, and a conducive work environment should be provided, or the resources relevant or needed to get the job done should be provided to the employee for quality performance to be attained, right? And based off the performance, which is based on quality outcome, there is an associated value for every level of outcome, which is the valence, like we said earlier on. Further on the expectancy theory, now we'll be looking at effort to performance expectancy. This is about the individual's perception of the probability that effort will lead to a high level of performance, right? Now, I'll just put it succinctly so we can understand this, right? If it were to be an in-class setting, I would have used an illustration to drive home this point. So, assuming I was in a class and I pulled out a dollar note and I said the first person to come to the front of the class would get this $1 note, right? Now, the effort to performance expectancy would be about the students in the class, their perception of their ability to be the first to come to the front to get the $1 note, right? Meaning that effort to performance expectancy has to do with every student's perception on how well they are able to actually get the $1 if they actually attempt or make the attempt to come to the front. If they are going to be the first to come to the front to actually be able to get the $1. So that's the perception of the probability that putting in that effort to come to the front will actually lead to them actually getting the $1, right? Now, the performance to outcome expectancy would be the individual's perception of the probability that performance will lead to a specific outcome, consequence, or reward in an organizational setting. So, performance to outcome expectancy in this particular example I was giving would be that in the event that, for instance, they make it to the front of the class, that I will actually dole out that $1, right? So if the individual actually believes that if they make it to the front of the class, that myself in turn will actually reward them for actually being the first or being the first student to come to the front of the class, that such a reward would actually be in place for such outcome or for such performance, right? That it will lead to an outcome which is actually giving them the $1. That would be the performance to outcome expectancy. And in both situations, both in the effort to performance expectancy and the performance to outcome expectancy, the probabilities should be greater than 0 for motivation to occur or for motivated behavior to occur. Finally, on the expectancy theory, you have the outcomes and valences, right? So individuals recognize that their behavior, or rather their behaviors, will result in a variety of outcomes, right? Whereby outcomes will be consequences of behaviors in an organizational setting, right? Most often than not, they come in form of rewards, right? Or an outcome for a wrongful behavior might come in form of punishment rather than reward, right? Also, each outcome has an associated valence, and valence in this situation would be an index of how much an individual values a particular outcome, right? It is also the attractiveness of the outcome to the individual. So, in the case of the example I was giving about the $1, having students to come to the front of the class, for them, the first person to come to the front of the class was going to earn the $1, right? Valence will also be a situation whereby the student would actually factor into their consideration if the $1 is of importance or is of value to them. So valence will be how much value that or any student that comes to the front of the class places on the $1 that they are coming to get as the reward, right? So that would actually have to deal with valence, right? How much the individual values the particular outcome. In this situation, the reward or the outcome, which is the reward, is the $1. So if they want the outcome, then the valence is positive, right? So if a student wants the $1, then if the valence is positive, which is it is above 0 on the positive probability, then it's most likely that such a student's motivation will occur and they will be motivated to come to the front of the classroom, right? But if they do not want it or if they do not perceive it as being valuable, then the valence is negative, right? Now, the valence is 0 if the student is indifferent, right? If they care less about if it's $1 or coming to the front or not about coming to get the reward, the valence is basically 0. But for motivated behavior to occur, the sum of the valences for the outcomes must be greater than 0, meaning that it has to be positive and greater than 0 for motivation or motivated behavior to occur. The Portalola extension. Now, the Portalola extension to expectancy theory has certain assumptions, right? And first would be like if an individual views the rewards as equitable for the performance, he or she is satisfied, right? So the Portalola extension actually reverses the causality implied by expectancy theory, whereby satisfaction leads to performance, right? It also suggests that high performance may lead to satisfaction based on the rewards given for high performance, right? So you find out that it's all about reverse causality. Now, this highlights the elements of employee satisfaction as a product of equitable or commensurate rewards for their performance. Now, what are the types of rewards? You have what you call the extrinsic rewards, which are outcomes set and awarded by external parties, right? And extrinsic rewards in organizations may include pay or promotion, right? Now you have the intrinsic rewards, which are outcomes that are internal to the individual, and intrinsic rewards may include self-esteem or a sense of accomplishment. So the diagram on this slide is basically an illustration of the Portalola extension of expectancy theory. Equity theory. Equity theory contends that people are motivated to seek social equity in the rewards that they receive for performance. Now, to determine equity, a person compares his or her ratio of outcomes. Now, the ratio of outcomes may be pay, recognition, promotions, and so forth, right? And they may also compare inputs. Now, inputs to the job may include time, experience, effort, and so forth. So they compare these ratios of their own ratios to that of someone else, right? So they compare their pay, their recognition, their promotions, the social relationship and intrinsic rewards, as well as they compare their time, experience, effort, education, and loyalty to that of someone else. And most often than not, people they compare it with are people they will call within organizational settings the reference, right? People they believe they are on the same level, or rather they probably undertake the same job responsibilities, or that they have the same level of competencies, right? So these would be the people they make such comparisons with. And you find out that the results can be a feeling of equitable results, right? Too few rewards or too many rewards, whereby the individual may feel that they are actually rewarded equitably, or that they are under rewarded, or that they may actually feel over rewarded, right? In the event that such an individual feels over rewarded, right? An individual who feels over rewarded actually might increase their inputs on the job by exerting more effort, right? They may also reduce their outcomes by producing fewer units, or they actually may distort the original ratios by rationalizing or justifying why they are being over rewarded, right? Or they may also reduce the inputs or increase the outcomes of the other person that they are actually doing such comparison with, or the reference that they are comparing themselves with. Further on the equity theory, so when the individuals have the feeling of being equitably rewarded, right, they tend to maintain performance and accept comparison as fair estimate. But in the event that they feel under rewarded, right, they could reduce the inequity by changing inputs by trying harder or slacking off, right? They could actually change outcomes by demanding a raise in pay, or they could distort the ratios by altering their perceptions of self or that of others that they're comparing themselves with, or they could leave the situation by quitting the job because they feel under-rewarded, right? Or they could choose another object person or another referent within the organization. Goal setting theory. Now, the goal setting theory of motivation assumes that behavior is a result of conscious goals and intentions, and that by setting goals for people or for employees in the organization, a manager should be able to influence their behavior. The original version of goal setting theory actually considers two specific goal characteristics, right? And these two goal characteristics were the goal difficulty and the goal specificity, right? They were expected to be the characteristics of goals that actually shape performance. Now, goal difficulty is the extent to which a goal is challenging and requires effort, whereas goal specificity relates to the clarity and precision of the goal, and both characteristics in the original version of the goal setting theory were expected to actually shape performance. Now, the expanded goal setting theory of motivation not only includes the goal difficulty and goal specificity, but also adds two additional factors, which are the goal acceptance and the goal commitment. Now, the goal acceptance is the extent to which an employee accepts a goal as his or her own, or a person accepts a goal as his or her own, whereas commitment is the extent to which a person is interested in actually reaching the goal. The diagram on this slide is an illustration of the expanded goal setting theory we discussed earlier on, right? Reinforcement perspective on motivation. The reinforcement theory on motivation argues that behavior that results in rewarding consequences is likely to be repeated, whereas behavior that results in punishing consequences is less likely to be repeated, right? So you find out that the focus is on the role of rewards as they cause behavior to change or remain the same over time. So let's say, for instance, I want to discourage late submissions in our online class, right? The best way to discourage students from submitting their assignments after the due date would be to penalize them, right? So that would be a punishing consequence for actually submitting assignments after the due date. And you find out that if such was the case, then it will cause for such behavior to change. But if there was no consequence reinforcing, or if there was no punishment reinforcing the behavior, right, or reinforcing that the behavior is to be discouraged, which is non-submission of assignments after the due date, right, or submission of assignments late, then there wouldn't be a deterred behavior, right? So reinforcement theory is all about putting in place those rewards or punishments to actually encourage for behavior to remain the same or to cause for behavioral changes respectively. So the rewards will cause for repetition of behavior, whereas the punishment will cause for a change in behavior. Kinds of reinforcement in organizations. There are four kinds of reinforcement that can result from behavior in organizations, and they are positive reinforcement, avoidance, punishment, and extinction. Now, positive reinforcement is about strengthening desired behavior by giving a reward or a positive outcome after a desired behavior is performed. And this may come in forms of praise, promotions, pay increases, right? Also, let's put it in an in-class setting, for example. When students actually show up for class more often than not, that's the kind of positive reinforcement for the instructor, right? Because good class attendance shows students enthusiasm to be in class, right? It provides the instructor with kind of positive reinforcement for their behavior. So whatever it is the instructor is doing that makes or prompts the students to keep showing up for class, the instructor will keep repeating those behaviors, if that makes sense. Now, avoidance is actually used to strengthen behavior by avoiding unpleasant consequences that will result if the behavior were not performed, right? So it allows, basically avoidance would be about allowing the employee to avoid unpleasant consequence if a certain behavior was not performed. Avoidance occurs, for example, when an employee comes to work on time to avoid a reprimand or query, right? So they are trying to avoid a punishment, more or less. Or maybe when a student actually shows up to class for them not to penalize, if for instance missing classes or attendance actually carries some points. Further on kinds of reinforcement found in organizations. Punishment weakens undesired behavior by providing an unpleasant consequence after a person exhibits the unwanted behavior. Now, reprimands and disciplinary measures such as demotion or layoff are examples of punishment. Now, extinction is used to weaken a behavior by not providing reinforcement of any kind when the behavior is exhibited. A manager who ignores frivolous emails from their subordinates or employee in order to encourage them to quit sending the messages is basically using extinction. Providing reinforcement in organizations. We find out that the kind of reinforcement provided is as important as when or how often reinforcement occurs, right? So we have what you call the fixed interval schedule. This is a form of reinforcement that is provided at fixed intervals of time, regardless of employee behavior, right? An example of this schedule is the weekly or monthly paycheck. Now, this method provides the least incentive for good work because reinforcement does not actually depend on the performance of the employee. Now, you have the variable interval schedule, which provides reinforcement at varying intervals of time, right? Such as occasional visits by the supervisor. Now, this schedule is appropriate for praise or other rewards based on visits or inspections by the manager, right? Now, this schedule is more motivating than the fixed interval schedule because employees do not know when the reinforcement will occur, and thus they tend to maintain a reasonably rather high level of effort all the time. Further on providing reinforcement in organizations, we have the fixed ratio schedule, which gives reinforcement after a fixed number of behaviors, regardless of the time that elapses between the exhibition or the expression of those behaviors, right? Now, an example of this schedule is a bonus after a certain number of sales. Under this arrangement, you find out that motivation will be relatively high because each behavior gets the employee closer to the reinforcement. We also have the variable ratio schedule, which varies the number of behaviors needed for each reinforcement, right? The variable ratio schedule is the most powerful schedule in terms of maintaining desired behaviors. But, however, a variable ratio schedule is difficult to use for formal rewards such as pay. Behavior modification. Organizational behavior modification is a method for applying the basic elements of reinforcement theory in an organizational setting. Now, you find out that for a behavior that should be increased or a behavior that should be decreased, these behaviors are identified and tied to specific forms or kinds of reinforcement, right? For them to either be increased, then they should be rewarded, and for them to be decreased, they should be punished. Empowerment and participation. Empowerment and participation represent important methods that managers can use to enhance employee motivation. Now, empowerment is the process of enabling workers to set their own work goals, make decisions, and solve problems within their sphere of responsibility and authority. Whereas participation is the process of giving employees a voice in making decisions about their own work. The role of participation and empowerment in motivation can be expressed in terms of both content perspectives and expectancy theory. Now, employees who participate in decision making may be more committed to executing decisions properly. Also, the successful process of making a decision, executing it, and then seeing the positive consequences can help satisfy a person's need for achievement, provide recognition and responsibility, as well as enhance self-esteem. Being asked to participate in organizational decision making may also enhance an employee's self-esteem. And for an employee to participate in decision making, employees may better understand the linkage between their performance and the rewards that they want most. Alternative forms of work arrangements. Now, many organizations today are providing employees with a variety of alternative work arrangements. We have the variable work schedules, right, which is a compressed work schedule whereby the employee is working a full 40-hour week in fewer than the traditional 5 days. And you have the 980 schedule, right, which is about working 2 weeks of the 2 weeks is for 80 hours, right? But the employee works one full week of 5 days and one compressed week of 4 days, yielding one day off work every other week. Further on the alternative forms of work arrangements, we still have what you call the flexible work schedules, right? Or what you call the flex time. These are work schedules that allow employees to select within broad parameters the hours that they work. We also have what you call the job sharing, when two part-time employees share one full-time job. And also what's called the telecommuting, which allows employees to spend part of their time working off-site, usually at home. Using reward systems to motivate performance. Now, an organizational reward system where rewards are tied specifically to performance, such systems have the greatest potential for enhancing motivation and performance. Reward system refers to the formal and informal mechanisms by which employee performance is defined, evaluated, and rewarded. Now, effects of organizational rewards. We find out that high-level performance-based rewards motivate employees to work harder. Rewards help align employee self-interest with organizational goals, right? Also, rewards foster increased retention and citizenship. Merit reward systems. Merit pay is the pay awarded to employees on the basis of the relative value of their contributions to the organization. So the greater the employee contribution, the greater the reward. Merit pay plan is a compensation plan that formally bases at least some meaningful portion of compensation on merit. And the most general form of merit pay plan is what you call the annual salary increases or increments. Incentive reward systems. Now, monetary incentives. You have the piece rate incentive plan. This is a reward system wherein the organization pays an employee a certain amount of money for every unit he or she produces. Now, the piece rate incentive plan is considered rather the simplest type of incentive system. You have incentive pay plans such as the individual incentive plans, right? This reward individual performance at the time when high performance occurs. They are most likely to be used in cases in which performance can be objectively assessed in terms of the number of units of output or similar measures, right? Rather than on subjective assessment of performance by a manager. Now you have what you call the sales commission, right? Or sales commissions plan. An employee is paid a percentage of the employee's sales to customers for selling the firm's products or services. So this may be considered the most common form of individual incentive as well, right? Now there are other forms of incentives which include non-monetary incentives, and examples of these non-monetary incentives are additional time off or company paid vacation, right? These non-monetary incentives, they are immediate, they are one-time rewards. Special perks also would fall under the non-monetary incentives. Now, a major advantage of incentives relative to merit systems is that incentives are typically a one-time reward and they do not accumulate by becoming part of the individual's base salary. But the merit pay systems actually form part of the individual salary. So for each time increment is earned, there's an increase in the person's annual base salary. Team and group reward systems. Now you find out that the common team and group reward systems will include the gain sharing programs, right? The underlying assumption of gain sharing is that employees and the employer or the organization have the same goals and thus should appropriately share in incremental economic gains. Now, this program is designed to share the cost savings from productivity improvements with employees. You also have what's called the Scanlon plan, whereby the percentage of award is very high in this plan, typically between 2/3 and 3/4 of the total cost savings, and the award is given to all employees, not just to the team or group rather that suggested and developed the ideas, right? So the Scanlon plan is similar to gain sharing, but the distribution of gains is tilted much more heavily towards the employees. Now there are other types of team and group rewards, right? In some cases, incentives are distributed at the team or group level based on existing salary of each employee, with incentive bonuses being given on proportionate basis. In other settings, each member of the team or group receives the same incentive pay, right? Now, non-monetary rewards may be given at the team or group level as well. You also have what you call the profit sharing plans, which creates a pool of money for annual employee bonuses based on corporate profits. Rewards may be given at the end of a time period or kept in an account until retirement rather. So the profit sharing plans actually provide an annual bonus to all employees based on corporate profits, right? You also have what you call the employee stock ownership plans, which means of gradually giving employees a major stake in ownership of a corporation, right? A portion of stock is transferred to employees as the company builds up profits. Executive compensation. The top level executives of most companies or organizations have separate compensation programs and plans. Now you have what's called the standard forms of executive compensation, which comprises one, the base salary. The base salary of an executive is a guaranteed amount of money that the individual will be paid. Now you have what's called the incentive pay or bonuses. Now this is the traditional method of incentive pay for executives. Bonuses are usually determined by the organization's performance, right? At the end of the year, some portion of a corporation's profit or an organization's profit may be diverted into a bonus pool. Executives usually receive a bonus expressed as a percentage of this bonus pool. The exact distribution of the bonus pool is usually specified ahead of time. Also, there are special forms of executive compensation, which include the stock option plans and the executive perks. Now, the stock option plan, right, this is established to give senior managers the option to buy company stock in the future at a predetermined fixed price. The basic idea underlying stock option plans is that if the executives contribute to higher levels of organizational performance, then the company stock should increase in value. Then the executive will be able to purchase the stock at that predetermined price, which should be lower than its future market price. Now, stock options are popular because they align to the interests of the managers with those of this, or rather, they align the interests of the managers with those of the stockholders, and they do not cost the organization much. There are also numerous concerns with using stock options as incentives for executives pay or executives incentives, and such concerns include: by not carrying stock options as liabilities, organizations may be overstating the value of the company, which can help raise the stock price. Also, executives may be tempted to make decisions that provide a short-term boost in stock prices to benefit themselves, but that actually hurt the company in the long run. Thirdly, if stock prices drop below the option price, executives may find that their options are worthless actually. Now, looking at the other special form of executive compensation called the executive perks, right? Executives also receive many other forms of compensation, and these perks include such stuff like private club memberships, access to company recreational facilities, low or no interest loans, and so on and so forth, right? Now, there are certain criticisms of executive compensation. Now, there are two important criticisms of this executive compensation in the United States today. The first would be that many feel that executive compensation, which averages over $1 million for most executives in many organizations, that is simply too high, particularly in comparison to the salary of other employees. Also, there often seems to be little or no relationship between the performance of the organization and the compensation that are paid to these executives. New approaches to performance-based rewards. Employee participation. This is about allowing employee participation in deciding the distribution of rewards. So you find out that some organizations are now allowing their employees to have a greater say in how rewards are determined and allocated. We have innovation in incentive programs. This will include offering stock options to all employees, or even individualizing the reward system such that different employees can be offered different incentives. Though this may also be called individualized reward systems, right? Because you find out that some organizations actually customize rewards to each individual employee's needs. Now, more effective communication is all about sharing information on how awards or rewards are earned and how they are distributed.